So one thing who my grandfather was to me was a chauffeur. And I learned from him to be the constant, loving, and steady support that allows others to grow. I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, in Baltimore County, in a wooded place in the back roads, no street lights, no sidewalks, in the woods. And until the 8th grade, I attended public school in the neighborhood, took the bus, could also walk to it. The class sizes were big, and my last name beginning with a Y, I was always in the back. My mother saw that I could use more attention and use a smaller environment, and so she was able to work with me to get accepted to an independent school. It was a 45-minute to an hour-and-a-half drive from my house one way. And beginning in the 8th grade, my grandfather partnered with my mother to drive me to school. So every evening, he picked me up and wore out his car, driving me back and forth. And in the mornings, he alternated with my mother to take me to school. And being at the Park School of Baltimore was very transformative. It allowed me to get my voice. And I just recognized that without his steady hand, without his willingness to drive me and chauffeur me, that I wouldn't have had that opportunity. And the way it's shown up in my life is that my wife and I were celebrating 9 years of marriage, and she was in residency at Middletown, Connecticut. And when she was pregnant with our daughter, Hannah, who's back there, during residency, the hours can be grueling. Sometimes you don't know when you're going to come home, when the shift is going to end. And I was very concerned about her driving in the dark and very concerned about her being tired as she would attend. And so I shifted around my whole schedule, my whole life, just to try to be her chauffeur and do for her what I thought I saw my grandfather doing for me. And what I learned from him, and even what I learned in driving my wife, is that how I feel is irrelevant. Sometimes she would ask me, like, I would try to encourage, she's a servant as well, and I would try to encourage her, just ask me, tell me when you need something, because she would try to take care of me as I would try to take care of her. And I learned from him that whether or not I'm tired, whether or not I have other things to do, whether or not there are other things in my schedule, that's irrelevant when it's time to take care of family. And one of the things I practice is just how to keep high priorities, and not allow them to be sacrificed with lower priorities, even though I may have made a prior commitment to be someplace or to do something. And also as a chauffeur, next month will be a year since my grandfather passed away, and there was a time where he was in a hospital, and he couldn't walk, and I always wanted the opportunity to drive him around in his old age. And I never really got that opportunity because I left Baltimore in 2003 and I came here for graduate school, and I intended to go back, but I never did go back. But there was a time in the hospital where I was there overnight with him. They didn't know what was going on. He had Lewy body dementia, and it was setting in, and there was no diagnosis. And it was a very uncomfortable time. And he was very disturbed, and he was trying to escape from the hospital. And my job was to stay there with him at night and to keep him company. He said, "OrLando, get my hat." So I went and got his hat, and he said, "And get my shoes." And I went and got his shoes. I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going home." And but I put him in that wheelchair, and I just pushed him around the hallways. And that was my one time to be his chauffeur. I think I learned from him to honor and value everyone. I remember one time as a boy, we were in church, and there was a senior man who came to the church, and he went to the bathroom on himself. And as a little boy, I saw my grandfather take that man and clean him up and not say anything to shame him, not say anything to disgrace him, but he just washed him up, took some of his own clothes, put it on him. He took the man and took a chair and set it outside of the church and sprinkled the man's body with perfume and let him sit outside and just air out. And I remember one time I was here at Church in the Rock in New Haven, and my wife and myself, we were helping to facilitate a financial class. And there was a senior man who was in the class, and he was talking to me at the front desk, and I looked down, I saw where he was standing that drops of poop had come through his pants, and it was on the floor. And I was trying to think, how can I not embarrass him? How can I not draw attention? And I went to my wife and I said, how do I clean this up? What do I do? Because I know there's some sanitary, I know something's going on. And she said, just get a paper towel, cover it, put it away. And so I did all of that. And that was one of my steps, is just to try to honor people for who they are and not try to disgrace them or embarrass them when something may be different. And what I learned from my grandfather that day is make people look better than they are. To make people look better than they are. And I remember that even though he lived through the times he lived through and died at the age of 86, we never had a racism conversation. We never had a conversation about being Black, and nor has he ever given me a reason to distrust anyone. And when he was in the hospital and he was in hospice at the VA in Baltimore, I went there one day and there was a gentleman sitting by his chair, a white gentleman, and he asked me who I was, and I said, well, who are you? And he said, well, I come here to talk to your grandfather. He said, because 40 years ago, I used to go to his house and read the meter. He was always so polite to me and always so nice to me. And I thought that was just special how people remember how he was, that he never belittled them, but always helped them to feel comfortable. My grandfather was a multiplier. He developed leaders who developed other leaders. He led many things. He got an award for Christian ministry for 60 years for being in the ministry, and he developed various Christian education programs, whether it be Vacation Bible School, whether it be a Sunday school, whether it be a new members class. And over the years, he retired from those, or he would go to certain places, and they would ask him to help him to start a program. And all of these have continued since he stopped them. And one of the things that I noticed is that he developed other leaders to continue something that he had started. He wasn't a type of person who would take all of the responsibility onto himself without allowing other people to share into that responsibility and be developed. And something that I'm trying to practice as I lead the Black church at Yale is how can I empower the students to be leaders and not just attenders? How can I empower them to be participants in their own faith and not just passive people who watch? And one of the things that I learned, or that I am learning, is that in order to do that, I have to think not so critically of myself. I have to get myself out of the picture. I can't always think about how good do I look or how well am I doing something, but I have to be willing to take my eyes off myself and put my eyes onto them. And one of the things my grandfather told me as he was becoming emeritus in his role is that he said, yeah, I've given this over to these other deacons and they've come to me to ask me, can we change this and can we change that? And this is a program he had been running for 20 years and started himself. He said, sure, you can change it. And he recognized that it wasn't about his ideas that needed to go forward, but it was about them trying their ideas and trying what was important to them. He was gentle. He was a builder of self-esteem. About a year ago when I was visiting him and we were going through all the murders of Black young men, and I was thinking about how I had survived, but how I wasn't confident that I would continue to survive, especially in the hands of police officers as I would get stopped here in New Haven. And I asked my grandfather, I said, I've never experienced you expressing fear. And instead of him saying to me, well, just man up or be strong, he said there was less for him to fear growing up than there is for me today. And I just appreciated the fact that he didn't try to make a comparison between who he is and who I am and elevate me to some pedestal that maybe I wouldn't think I could stand upon. I thought he was very sacrificial. One of the things my mother wanted to do, in addition to work, now that her children were older, was to learn how to teach adults to read who didn't know how to read. And my grandfather had only gone to middle school. He never graduated from high school because he needed to work to provide for his family. And she asked him, Dad, can I teach you how to read so that I can practice and train so that I will be able to teach others how to read? And he was willing to go through her many lessons each week to learn how to read and to better write, just so she could develop herself. And so I learned from him to be sacrificial. He was a teacher without words. I was able to read the book of his life without him talking a lot about it. I tried to live this before my students. Even though he was a man of faith, and even though I follow in his footsteps, we never really talked about the Bible. He never taught me from the Bible and said, this is the scripture that applies to this. He just lived it before me in a way that I could catch it. He was a trailblazer. He figured out fatherhood and marriage without having it modeled for him. My great-grandfather, who I was able to meet, he lived in New York, and my grandfather lived without him and grew up without him. My grandfather was raised by his grandmother. And I remember when I was having challenges with my father, who I don't remember ever living in a house with me, but was around. And I was talking to my grandmother. I said, well, my father didn't grow up without a father, so maybe that's what's playing out in his life. And my grandmother said, well, your grandfather didn't grow up with his father. And he had been married, my grandfather was married 64 years. And my mom and my uncle speak highly of him. He raised both of them to be lawyers. And I just recognized that even though he didn't have an example, he was able to trailblaze in his own life and in his own family how to be a husband and how to be a father. And when I decided to become married, one of my big challenges and fears was, am I going to stay married for long? And how can I be a husband? How can I be a father? Especially if I wasn't sure if it was modeled well for me. He was very trusting. He had Lewy body dementia, and it came on very quickly. And he would see things that weren't there. He would see water falling from the ceiling like a waterfall, and he would try to push things away from him. Or he would see people out in the yard doing things, and he would say, "OrLando, you see those people out there pushing that wheelbarrow?" And I say, no, grandfather, I don't see it. And as we took him to the hospital to be diagnosed, because it's a brain disorder, they weren't able to do a brain biopsy to figure out what was going on. And so they had to try to come up with what it was. And when the doctors would tell him and when my mothers would tell him, no, Daddy, there's nothing there, I was very surprised because he was trusting enough to believe that even though he saw something, it wasn't correct what he was seeing. And I wrote that even in Lewy body dementia, he was trusting. Though he saw what he saw, he trusted and accepted our statement of nothing being present. He kept his peace, he didn't protest, and he didn't become belligerent. Even I would ask my mom, how is Grandpa doing? Is he still seeing things? She said, yes, but he doesn't talk about it because he knows it's not there. And even though it bothers him, he doesn't want to upset us. And so he just accepts that he's seeing things. So even when he was kind of going out of his mind, he kept his mind. A few more things. One, he's a neighbor. I remember as a little boy in middle school, he cleaned up trash in the neighbor's yard. So some people may be hoarders inside their house. This woman was elderly, and she was a hoarder outside of her house. And I remember he hired a big dumpster to come to the house in the middle of the street and to be dropped off. And the cleanup wasn't appropriate for me as a little boy, but he brought me there to watch. And he went and he cleaned up her yard. And I appreciated that he was a neighbor to someone who couldn't pay him back. That one I haven't gotten, but I'm trying to do. One thing, near his house, there was an elderly lady who asked me to cut grass. And so he had been teaching me how to cut grass. And so I went to her house, I cut her grass. She gave him some money to give to me. My grandfather gave some of that money back. And all I remember is that my mother was very upset at him. She said, don't give away that boy's money. So I don't try to follow him in business things. But in terms of respecting people and their gratefulness, I do try to follow him. Health, he walked 5 miles a day. He was a very slender man, could not put on weight. For a time, I was very slender, could not put on weight, even though I tried to go to the gym. And about a month ago, I decided, OrLando, this lifting weights is not working out for you. and you need to be consistent anyway, so why don't you just try to walk? Try to do what your grandfather has done. And he would walk outside 5 miles a day. I don't know how he found time to do it, but he did it. So right now I'm walking, well, I won't tell you, but I'm walking indoors on a treadmill. But I'm very excited when the weather gets a little warmer and there's no more snow to walk around New Haven 5 miles. Every time he went to the doctors, the nurses would bring in other nurses to get them to try to guess how old he was because they could not believe that he was as old as he actually was. He was a loving servant. He served his God. He served his pastor. He served his board chair, his Sunday school head, without gossip and without complaint. I remember leaders talking about how they would be roasted over Sunday dinner because other people would talk about their leadership and criticize them. He never did. And I don't know how he did that, serving other leaders for a good 60 years. I never heard him complain. And the last thing, and then I have something to read. I want to learn how to live and progress in life without leaving people. One of the things that I've done in pursuing my education and just trying to become better is that I left all the people I grew up with. I left my friends from high school, my friends from college, everybody in Maryland. I left some friends from graduate school, and I'm tired of leaving people. I want to learn how to grow without breaking relationship. There was a bus during my grandfather's funeral that carried the grandchildren, and after the funeral, we learned that the chauffeur of the bus was the pastor down the street of the church my grandfather attended 30 years prior. My grandfather attended that church for 27 years and served as a deacon, and then he went to another church to serve for 31 years. And that pastor did not think it was beneath him, still honored my grandfather as my grandfather honored him. And that's the type of relationship I want to keep, that maybe when I get older and I'm unable to do things and I need help, that there are still some people who recognize that they knew me back when, and I just didn't dishonor them, but I love them in a way that they can continue to love me. This month, last year, my last thing, I was on a plane to visit my grandfather, and my mom said, you probably should come home. I think it's time to say goodbye. And I wrote this on the plane to my CLP friends, to my leaders, Eric, Karen. It says, "Hi, good people. Good morning. Hope you are great today. A quick note. I'm just arriving to Baltimore to say thank you and goodbye to my grandfather. I suspect the days and years ahead will be harder than I desire. I'm encouraged and equipped for the future, so that's good, and I'm grateful. But I'm not looking forward to living life without him. Earlier on, I did not know that this was a possibility. Had I known, I might have lived life differently. I probably wouldn't have climbed so high or stood so far on his shoulders, as the distance today between myself and the ground wouldn't be so vast. Had I known someday he might not be here, I probably wouldn't have accepted so much of his help. That way, I could have progressed much slower and not very far, instead of receiving his help and going much further faster than I even knew was possible. I probably would have said no to his request that I help facilitate his new members class at church, and so not to realize my strength and passion in teaching and other ministry. I might could have avoided being a preacher, a pastor, and brother today. I probably would have said no to him moving me into the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, no to the long back and forth rides to the Park School, no to gardening, no to trips to saxophone lessons, no to baseball practice, no to allergy shots for years, no to building things on his workbench, no to asking Mr. Russell whether he might hold on to his Corvette for me until I saved enough money, no to committing myself to love my wife and do right by her, no allowing him to travel to Connecticut when I got my first place on my own, again when I preached my first sermon, again when I bought my first house, again for my wedding that we planned with a week's notice, again when I defended my Yale thesis, and again when Hannah had her first birthday, and again when I began pastoring my own church, which I love. I would have said no to him teaching me how to fix or replace a toilet, repair a faucet, cut grass, obey my mother, honor my father, love my sister, or otherwise how to be a young man and man of character. I might have said no to being called college knowledge, then the graduate, then hey doc, and preacher. And you know he's pastoring right now, and most simply, OrLando. Above all, I would have asked him not to hoist me onto his shoulders. When at 6 years old, I walked down the aisle to Bishop Brown to accept Christ. I would have asked him not to shout, "This is my grandson, this is my grandson." I would have asked him not to be the deacon around when I was baptized. I would have said no to him helping me with vacation, Bible school, and doing the puppet. I would have said no, but I didn't know. I just didn't know. Thank you.